Oh, looks like it's going. Hopefully. Oh, all right, we're live. Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew. I'm on the events team at Geekdom. Thank you for tuning into today's online workshop. Today, we're joined by Cynthia Phelps, who will be discussing stress in the time of Corona. It's a part of her series of events on being a resilient entrepreneur. If you're not familiar with these online workshops or may not be a member of Geekdom, with Geekdom temporarily being closed, we wanted to launch this to still have a chance to connect with some leaders in our community, but also have a chance to still have some of that Geekdom feel online through these live streams. So if you have any questions along the way, I'll be the one in the background sending them to Cynthia, but I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Cynthia to kick things off.
All right. Thank you very much, Matthew. And welcome everybody to the session on stress, part of a Resilient Entrepreneur series that I have. And after kind of being in our situations for a few weeks now, you might have some experience with some extra stress yourself. So I thought it was timely that we might be able to come together and just talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then also what we can do about it to try to mitigate some of that stress. So we're going to talk about what is the stress response in our body, and then we're going to talk about some ways that you can actually help that in the moment, and then actually give you a tool to help you lower your stress. So if you don't know me, I am Cynthia Phelps, and I am trained as a research scientist. My degree is actually in pharmacology with a focus in neuroscience. I spent several years as faculty at UT Health in Houston, where I developed technologies that helped people to learn and change health behaviors. And I started my own company in 2009, and now I actually have two. I became very interested in kind of the positive psychology movement, which is ways that we can leverage that science to be able to improve our lives. And so I started Inner Ally in 2014. And so I have been doing workshops and coaching and a variety of speaking on how you can improve your life with these science-based techniques. And so everything that you're going to hear today has to do with how your body works and how your mind works and how you can leverage it to be able to be more resilient. And so I'm delighted to be here. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the stress response of the body. And so most people have probably by now heard of the fight or flight response. So this is what happens to your body's physiology when you have a threat. And so kind of the classic example is like there's a bear chasing you, or a bear comes up and goes, ah, right? And so your body goes into this fight or flight mode. And so it releases adrenaline into your system, and that takes the blood in your body and moves it into certain parts. And so it puts it into your thighs so that you can run or kick, puts it into your big muscles of your arms so that you can fight. And then one of the things it does is move blood away from other areas of your body. So it actually pulls it out of your brain, which means that your frontal lobe, which is the part that you use to make really good critical decisions, is a little bit impaired during this stress response, which is okay when you're having to fight a bear. Your fingers may become tingly because your extremities lose a little bit of blood, and also your digestive tract and your stomach. You may feel a little bit queasy or a little uneasy in this area, and that's largely because the blood's being pulled away from that area as well. And so this stress response is very normal, and it serves us as a way to be able to take quick action in a moment of threat. The problem is that I don't know if you've ever kind of seen an animal like a dog. I have a dog, and when my dog gets startled by something, like you can tell that they're ready to go into action, ready to run or ready to bark. But then, like really quickly, like they can just be like lying on the couch, like nothing happened. With humans, sometimes our threats are not really like a bear. Our threats tend to be a little more existential in nature, and they tend to be a little more prolonged. And so, what that means is we can kind of get stuck in this heightened anxiety, right? Where instead of having our adrenaline system like turned full on, it's kind of turned on part way, and then we're kind of stuck in this like chronic anxiety space, which can lead to depression, cardiovascular problems, and diabetes, all kinds of things that you don't really want. So the what we're going to talk about is some quick ways to kind of get yourself calmed down from this response, so you can be the dog lying on the couch like nothing happened. And so one of the things that I wanted to do first is kind of help you to recognize the fight or flight response in yourself, because we're a lot more complicated than like a dog that's responding to something they're scared of. And so to expand on the fight or flight response in humans, it really expresses in different ways. So there's the fight, there's the flight, which is escaping or running. There's also the freeze, which is, you see this sometimes in animals as well. They kind of play dead if there's a threat. And recently, psychologists have also defined another part of it, and it's called fawn. And so in fawning is when you are really kind of anxious and have that threat response, and then you turn your attention to take care of somebody or something else, and take the attention off yourself. And so I'm just going to go through these different responses and then give you some examples of things that you might be experiencing if you're in one of these categories. And I want to be real clear here. These responses are normal, especially in a situation like ours, which is a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, where the threat is kind of ongoing. And so we have a lot of responses to that, but it doesn't mean our responses are necessarily good or bad. I want to try to help you to reserve the judgment on yourself and rather start to look at it like, does this serve me or does this not serve me, right? And so it's not necessarily if these responses are good or bad, is if they work for you or not. And we have the opportunity to make different choices if we know that they're not working for us. So what might it look like if you were in a fight response right now? So you might find yourself fighting with people on social media. You might find yourself trying to control the people maybe in your immediate environment, like if you're home with family, or you might try to be controlling your coworkers over Zoom. A fight response would be something like panic buying groceries at the grocery store, feeling the need to you get physically tense and kind of feeling that need to want to fight. The flight response can express in a variety of ways as well. And so the primary thing about the flight response is that it is an escape response. And so escape responses can be like this feeling of wanting to get up and run, which actually can be very helpful behavior. But it also may be ways of escaping that we do as humans, like maybe binge watching Netflix, or eating more food than you would normally eat, or engaging in drug or alcohol consumption, getting lost in reading books, daydreaming, playing video games, And so, just as I said before, a lot of these behaviors, they can be helpful or they can be not helpful. And we even need to kind of assess it in the moment for ourselves, because sometimes one kind of coping behavior will work for a while and then it stops working for us. And so I really hope that you can let down some of the judgment that you might have around yourself and some of the behaviors that you are engaging in that you might be like judgmental, self-judgmental. Let's just not judge ourselves right now. The world is hard enough. Let's just take a deep breath and say, well, is this behavior serving me? And if so, we can continue. Is it not serving me? And if so, let's come up with some other things. So that's the flight. So the freeze response, you might realize that you have a much harder time getting things done right now. This is very typical where you're having difficulty focusing, like I said, like the blood is not effectively in your brain right now during this type of response. And so you might have feelings of overwhelm or panic or fear. It can lead to kind of feelings of isolation or abandonment, loneliness, feelings of loneliness, especially because we're physically isolated from people that we normally see on a regular basis. Some people kind of can go into a depressive or shutdown mode where maybe they're sleeping more than normal. You could have some kind of intrusive thoughts that are basically things that show up in your brain and you're like, hey, I don't like that. And also you might have a real inability to kind of complete projects or start projects. So like this basically feeling of being stuck or frozen, right? The freeze response. So the fourth way that the fight or flight response will express in you is this idea of fawn. And so this is where we have all these uncomfortable feelings because we're in the situations we're in. And so it's the appropriate response, right? Those emotions are appropriate. But what we do with them is we actually focus them on another person. And so this could look like kind of obsessively calling the people that you love but are separated from. It could look like trying to control the behavior of other people around you. It could look like neglecting your own needs and just focusing on the needs of people like at work or people in your community, maybe even putting yourself at risk to be able to help other people. Another thing that it might show up as is this perfectionism, like this intense feeling of needing to get everything right now. Because oftentimes we use perfection and trying to be good or trying to be right as a way to get acceptance from other people so that we feel good about ourselves. And so in the fawn response to trauma, which is we're going through a collective trauma right now, sometimes people's perfectionism, especially if they already tend towards it, can get really ramped up. And so those are some things to kind of pay attention to: the fight, flight, which is escape, the freeze, being stuck, and then the fawn, forgetting to take care of ourselves and taking care of other people instead. And so when we're in this real ramped up kind of feeling, there are a few things that you can do to kind of take yourself down a few notches. I want to kind of distinguish between kind of two different states. One is a real ramped up fight or flight feeling. And then the other is more of like a kind of chronic anxiety, like basal level anxiety. I'm actually a certified teacher of mindfulness, and so I teach meditation and a variety of different techniques to help people improve their lives. When you're in this real ramped up state, sitting down and trying to do like a 20-minute meditation, you may find to be incredibly difficult. And you would not be alone, because when you're in that ramped up state, you need something that's fast and something that's that doesn't have a whole lot of cognitive load, because the blood's not in your brain right now. So one of the things that you can do to calm your nervous system, and actually kind of turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, is to do some deep breathing. And so the way that your body works is that you have two nervous systems. You've got your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, and they work like yin and yang. And so during the day, your sympathetic nervous system is more active. So you have more cortisol during the day, that kind of a stress hormone, but it keeps you alert and awake, which is good. This is what we want. And then at nighttime, that hormone goes down and the parasympathetic system is more activated. And so one way that we can trick the parasympathetic system into activating is with our breath. And so when I'm in a really ramped up state, one of the things that I find that is the most helpful is to just take a deep breath in and let it out with a sigh. And I could usually do this 3 times in a row. And if you notice, when I take a deep breath in, on the out breath, I'm actually exhaling for longer than my in breath. And so this is a cue to your nervous system that says like, hey, time to turn on parasympathetic nervous system. And so one way you can do this without having to count or anything, which I find to be difficult when I'm all ramped up, is you take your breath in and then you take your lips and you make a little O. And just by doing that, you restrict the air as you breathe out, and you naturally have a longer out breath. And so if you can, in the moment when you're feeling really ramped up, do this breathing exercise, it can really help to kick in your parasympathetic nervous system. And it can really help you. And you can do series of these 3 breaths if you're continuing to feel anxious. One of the other ways to get your physiology to work for you instead of against you in this moment is to activate the oxytocin system. So oxytocin, you might have heard it be called the love hormone. It is the hormone in your body that is associated with feelings of like warmth and security. And so the kind of sounds that are associated with like an oxytocin type state are like, ah, or, oh. And you might immediately recognize these sounds as something that you automatically do, like when you hold a baby or a puppy. And so oxytocin can be released when you are near a baby or a puppy, or you're a new mom and you've had a baby. It's also called the bonding hormone, but it's a way of bringing really good, safe, warm feelings into your body. And so we can turn this system on ourselves. And so I like to use the example of kind of holding a baby or a puppy, because then it helps you to remember how to actually do this. And so I don't know, like if you think about petting your dog, or stroking the head of a baby, or petting a lover or a small child, we have an innate ability to do this. And so we know that this motion is just like this. it's not this. It's not this. It's not really hard, and it's not super soft. It's we all do this. It's just the right pressure and just the right speed. So it turns out that if you do that, you're actually activating a nerve fiber that's all over in your skin, and they're called C fibers, and they connect directly to your amygdala brain. And so this is like you're hardwired for this soothing technique to work for you. And so there's a variety of ways that this is taught so that you can get this to work for yourself. And so, the easiest one is this stroking. And so you can do it for yourself by kind of stroking your arms. You might notice that people will kind of do this kind of thing maybe when they're nervous or feeling uncomfortable. Some people call it hand wringing, but honestly, it's most likely a self-comforting type of thing. Some people rub their feet together at that same motion. If I'm stressed out and I'm sitting in a meeting, I like to kind of rub my thighs at that same pace. That can give you a real comforting feeling, and if you're at home by yourself listening to me, I really encourage you to try these with me, because I'm going to give you a whole set of them. And then what I want you to do is figure out which one really works for you. And then I want you to be able to use it in a time when you're like, ah. So there's this rubbing that you can do. Another one is like putting a hand or two hands over your heart. And so with this one, I have my hands like right over my sternum, and I'm just pushing a little bit, like not excessive pressure, but enough so that it's kind of feels, grounded, and I can feel my hands on my chest. And with this one, what I like to do is combine it with that breath. So put your hands on your chest and just take a deep breath with me and let it out. And if you're watching me do this, you'll notice that every time I do it, like my shoulders drop a little, my tone of voice tends to actually change. I get a little calmer I get a little less excited about what I'm talking about. And so these techniques can really work. You can actually do the rubbing on your chest. You can do pressure like on your forearms. I really like this one right now because I'm actually sheltering in place by myself. And so I don't have any human touch right now. And I like also on my upper arms. And then even kind of like the shoulder grab where you're just kind of squeezing in on yourself can feel really comforting. And, doing these always feels awkward, right? So I just want to acknowledge that. I remember when I was first taught some of these techniques, I was like, oh, well, that's fine for other people, but like, I'm not going to do that. But, the more that I continued to train in some of these methods, the more I realized that if I just could relax my own judgment of myself, and kind of close my eyes even while I'm doing the techniques, I could give myself like a little more latitude to actually feel the comfort that my body naturally will give me if I do these techniques. So, many of these that I have told you, it's similar to kind of when you're working with a baby, you might squeeze their little feet or their little arms. And it's really associated with this like nurturing kind of like, this like very soft side of compassion. But compassion also has another side. It's like kind of a yin and yang of compassion. So there's this nurturing like, side, but then there's also a very fierce side. And this is the side of compassion that says, no, like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take on another task. You are not going to violate me. You are not going to. This is more of a fierce compassion. And so when you practice some of these techniques, you're actually practicing self-compassion, giving yourself compassion during a time of challenge and difficulty. And so most of the techniques that I showed you are more of the nurturing side of compassion. But for the fierce side of compassion, where you're setting boundaries and you're taking care of yourself, it's kind of like I'll call the mama bear side of compassion, or it's really a lot of male energy, right? And so taking your fist and putting it over your chest and then cupping that fist with the other hand and taking a deep breath and letting it out, it has a much different feel to it, right? Like even my out breath was more of like than the other one. And so this is more of a feeling of fierce compassion, and it can elicit some feelings of security, like groundedness, those types of things for you. And so if the nurturing side isn't working for you and you need to show up in the world in a more fierce way, I would try the fist technique for these are called self-soothing techniques. So, all right, well, so that was the physiology section of the of the workshop. The next thing we're going to do is actually work into understanding a little bit better about how we talk to ourselves. And so the majority of the things that I teach and even some of the research that I do is based on this idea of showing yourself compassion or being supportive of yourself, especially during a time when you're stressed out or struggling or having a hard time. And so we're going to do just a little exercise for you to get a better handle on this for yourself and how you're actually reacting to yourself during times of difficulty. And so if you've got a pen and paper, something just to scratch some notes on, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little exercise where we close our eyes and do a little visualization, and then we're going to open our eyes and write down some notes real quickly. And then we're going to do another visualization where we close our eyes and envision something. And then we're going to write down some notes. And then we're going to have a little, I guess, one-way discussion about what happened for you. But I have a hunch I can predict. So if you will, and I know that you might be tempted to not really fully participate in this. Maybe you're trying to eat lunch or whatever, but I really ask you, if you can, to just close your eyes now and just take a deep breath and let it out. And I want you to think over the last week or so about if you've had a friend or a family member, someone who came to you because they were having a really hard time. There was some kind of struggle they were going through, or maybe they got a bit of bad news. It's possible that in your mind right now, you've got a laundry list of people who have come to you with difficult situations. That's normal. And I want you just to kind of flip through those people and settle on the one that just feels right to you. And take that person and just focus on them in your mind. And I want you to think of the actual situation that happened when they were telling you about whatever it was that happened with them, their moment of suffering or their moment of struggle. You know, were they on the phone? Was it over a Zoom meeting? Was it somebody right in your household? And I want you to think carefully about what it was that you said to this person in the moment. I want you to consider when you're speaking with them. And the last thing I want you to consider is if there was some kind of action that you took, maybe if you were in the same household, you gave them a hug or a pat on the back, or maybe it was just kind of a reassurance if it's somebody over the phone that, oh, don't worry, I'm here for you, we'll get through this. Was there any kind of action oriented thing that you did for your friend or family member? Now, taking a deep breath in, letting that situation of suffering leave when you breathe out. And I want you to just open your eyes and jot down quickly what came up for you. What was it that you said to them? What was your tone of voice? And was there anything that you did? Just a couple notes will do. And now you can put down your pen or pencil, and we're going to go back into one more quick visualization. I want you to close your eyes and then take another deep breath in and release. And now I want you to think about over the last week or two, was there a particular situation where you were really struggling? Maybe you got bad news about a job. Maybe you have a friend who was sick. Whatever it was, I want you to just focus in on one thing. There might be many over the last couple of weeks that have been challenging. And I want you to take yourself back right to that situation. I want you to think about where were you? Were you standing? Were you sitting? Were you on the phone? Just feeling some of those challenging emotions that came up for you during this time, right in that moment. And I want you to try to remember, what was it that you said to yourself in the moment? Was there some kind of tone of voice that you're typically using with yourself when you're in these moments of suffering? And was there anything that you did to take care of yourself in that moment? And now we're going to breathe in one more time. And as we release the breath, I want you to release that stressful situation and drop your shoulders. Whew. And go ahead and open your eyes and just jot a couple words down based on that experience that you just had. So this exercise is actually called How Do I Treat a Friend? And we have done, when I say we, I'm a certified teacher that's part of a larger movement of mindful self-compassion, a mindfulness movement. And this research-based technique has been used with thousands and thousands of people all over the world, in fact. And this particular exercise, in general, what we have found is that around 72% or so of the people treat another person who's struggling much better than themselves. And then there's some people who do a pretty good job for both themselves and the other person. And then there's a very small minority that do a better job of taking care of themselves than other people. And so if you noticed a difference between how you treat yourself versus how you treat a friend who is in a time of struggle or distress or stress, this is an opportunity for you to use that as a bit of a role model for yourself. So I love this exercise because what it shows is that you already know how to do it, right? Because the odds that you are able to kind of pick up a call from a friend who just lost a job and provide comfort and a listening ear and to say things that are kind and supportive, even if those things sound like that boss was a jerk. These are things that, we can give ourselves, these words of encouragement. And so often we really beat up on ourselves when we're in a time of struggle. And so maybe if it's us that lost a job versus our loved one or a friend, for us, we start picking on ourselves and we say, oh, I should have done this or should have done that better, or I'm not good enough, or how am I ever going to find another job? Like, you would never say that to another person who just lost a job. You'd be like, oh, dude, I wonder how you're ever going to find another job. But for some reason, we are perfectly fine with saying some of those things to ourselves. And so this exercise is an opportunity. It basically opens the door for you to consider how you're treating yourself when you're in a time of stress or struggle. And the next kind of tool that I'm going to teach you is a kind of a mantra or a saying or a phrase, a set of phrases, whatever you want to call it. But it's a way that you can use to be able to speak to yourself in a way that is supportive. And so oftentimes people don't really have the vocabulary because they are not usually supportive of themselves or kind to themselves. And so this tool can give you kind of some stock language, if you will, to be able to be more compassionate towards yourself when things are really falling apart around you. And so this is actually called the self-compassion break, and it's part of the research-based curriculum that I teach, which originated out of UT Austin by a professor named Dr. Kristen Neff, who's the premier researcher in self-compassion. If you are curious about self-compassion, her website is great to learn more about it. It's self-compassion.org. And if you click on the button that says quiz, you actually can quiz yourself to see how self-compassionate you are. And if you need to maybe do a little brush up on your skills, that quiz is actually like the 26-point scale that's used in the research literature to measure self-compassion. So like, it's the real deal. So self-compassion, the reason that I teach it is it's very tightly correlated with resilience, which is the ability to kind of pick yourself up after the world has like given you a blow. And the thing is we're human. We live on Earth, and we are bound to have things that happen to us. And so having the skills of being self-compassionate can help you be much more resilient. So people who are not self-compassionate to themselves tend to be more depressed, more anxious, and more stressed. They also, some of the research that I've done with Dr. Potter, who's a dean of research over at UT Health San Antonio, we have shown that your risk for addiction is much higher if your self-compassion is low. And in that study, we actually looked at alcohol, cannabis, and opioids. And so people who are more self-compassionate are more resilient. They're better able to use positive coping strategies to be able to deal with their situations that life deals to us. And, you know, because I'm speaking to a group of people who are entrepreneurs and small business owners, I'm also going to throw in the fact that people who are more self-compassionate tend to be more productive and also innovative and creative. And so, you know, that part is really cool because it turns out if you're really hard on yourself, you take fewer risks and you end up being less innovative and less creative. And that can be the death of being an entrepreneur or a small business owner. You know, when you, especially in times like this, when we need to pivot and do things differently in response to a trauma such as a pandemic. So there's so many reasons why self-compassion is something that you should consider looking into. I'm not going to list them all today, but those are a few really fabulous ones. But I want to teach you the tool. And so the tool is called the Self-Compassion Break, and it has 3 parts. And the 3 parts are associated with basically the 3 parts of self-compassion. The first is mindfulness. The second is called common humanity. And then the third is the actual act of being kind to yourself or supportive to yourself. And so the first part is mindfulness. And so mindfulness is nothing more than being aware in the moment about what's going on for you and to really kind of put down the judgment of the situation, right? And so in mindfulness, when you're going through a struggle or some kind of difficulty, a mindfulness response would be something like, ah, this is hard. Like, oh, like this is challenging. Like this is suffering, right? And it's not judging it. It's just noticing. And so when I do this first part, it sounds like, ah, this is suffering. And, you know, some people have a hang up with the word suffering because they're like, well, I'm not suffering. You know, there's people dying on respirators right now. And my little problems are not that big. But the problem is your nervous system does not care about your opinions on other people's suffering. It only knows your own. And so acknowledging the fact that you're having a hard time is important regardless of how hard of the time you think it is. So if it works for you, you can say, ah, this is struggle. Or, you know, you can customize it for yourself and say something like, this is a crappy situation. A little more judgment in that, but you know, I'm really looking for how to modify these tools for you. So that's the first part, the mindfulness part. The second part is common humanity. And this is nothing more than the recognition that we are all human, and you don't get out of being human without having some hardship and some suffering. And so why is this piece important? Because people who are not good at practicing self-compassion tend to, when something bad happens to them, they tend to isolate, and they tend to have thoughts that say like, I can't believe this happened to me. I'm the only one that would screw this up that bad. And they're all thoughts of isolation and difficulty. And so recognizing your common humanity is a way to kind of short circuit that and to build more connection, because you realize that even though you're going through this difficulty, like many, like all of us, it's a worldwide pandemic, right? We're all going through this difficulty right now in one way or another. And so mindfulness, this is suffering. Common humanity, everyone suffers. And then the third thing is the kindness piece. And so the exercise that we just did about how do I treat a friend versus how I treat myself, this is a really good way for you to come up with ideas about how to treat yourself more kindly. And so the phrase that I use for this is, may I be kind to myself. And so that phrase is worded that way with a may I, because I have seen many people practice kind of self-improvement, kind of like using a sledgehammer on themselves, like, I'm gonna get more productive. And it's kind of a brutal process. And in this, we're really practicing being more kind and supportive of ourselves. And so that it doesn't work to jam yourself into self-compassion, right? We want to invite ourselves. And so the may I is like an invitation, like, may I be kind to myself. And just in saying that, you open the door to the possibility that you treat yourself with kindness in that moment. And so what might that look like for you? It varies for everyone because we all maybe need something a little bit different, but as humans, there's already ways that we're so similar. And so sometimes we may just be able to give ourselves a kind word, something that a friend might say to us. Sometimes it may just be stopping and taking a deep breath like we did with the breathing exercises. Or it could be giving yourself some of that physical comfort and soothing to help your nervous system relax and kick in that parasympathetic nervous system. So the last part is just an invitation to you to maybe do things a little bit differently in a way that serves you better. And so the mantra is, this is suffering. Everyone suffers. May I be kind to myself. And in that last part, you can say, may I be kind to myself in this moment, or may I support myself in this moment. You can also say something like, what is it I really need in this moment? And just let yourself sit with that for a minute. And see if you need that soft side of compassion, that nurturing, or maybe you need the fierce side of compassion, the part that says, I'm not going to take it anymore. Or that's the same part that, like, when you've got a really big deadline that gets you up off the couch, like, I got to get this done, like now, like it's time, up, time to do it, right? That's fierce compassion, because compassion is looking out for your best interests. And inevitably, when I teach about self-compassion, people will tell me that, self-compassion sounds weak. It sounds self-indulgent. It sounds like I'm not going to be able to be motivated. But in fact, if you really look at the research literature, all of those things are completely the opposite of what it does. And so I compel you to ignore maybe the reaction that you have, like that if you have a negative reaction to being kind to yourself, I compel you to just kind of put that on the shelf, because that emotional response is actually not accurate for what we really know about the science about what's happening in your body and healthy responses in humans. And so I'm going to take any questions now. And I know I have one here. Somebody was saying, like, if you're feeling frozen or stuck, what is the best way to get out of that and be able to take action? Okay, right. So feeling stuck is that kind of freeze part of the fight or flight. And so oftentimes you're probably feeling overwhelmed. And so I think any of these tools that I taught you today can be a really good starting point. And so the tools are the soothing, the different soothing touches, the deep breaths, and then also this mantra of this is suffering. And if you're stuck, that's suffering. right? Like you're feeling guilty, like I'm not getting what I need to get done, and you're in that. It's not a comfortable feeling. So you say, this is suffering. Everybody suffers. May I be kind to myself? Or what do I need in this moment? And if you sit with that for a couple minutes, you may come up with something really interesting. Like maybe you need to call someone who will tell you that you're awesome. I have a short list of people that I call. I'll be like, okay, I need you to tell me I'm awesome because I'm having a bad day. Now, I love the phone a friend methodology. I love the accountability partner methodology. And there's all kinds of methods that we can use to motivate. Like there's books about how to motivate yourself when you're stuck. Like we don't need to recreate the wheel, right? But what's different about what I teach versus that stuff is we can apply these tools before you go into the other problem solving modes of like, setting a 20-minute timer or whatever it's going to be. Like if you set yourself a 20-minute timer and your nervous system is all still jacked up and you're like, I've been stuck for 3 days. The world is falling. You're going to have a hard time getting out of that. But if you can use some of these techniques to soothe yourself, and even taking a walk, doing things that work for you, other self-care things that work for you can help get you to calm down, and then you can start applying some of these other tools. All right. Do we have any other questions at this point? I really appreciate the fact that you were listening today, because what that tells me is that you're already taking the first steps of being compassionate towards yourself and towards building your own resilience. This is a very difficult time, and it's tempting to just go, 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 and not take a break and not take care of ourselves. But the fact is, we're just humans and we'll break if we push ourselves that hard. And so just the fact that you're taking time to listen to this shows me that you know how to build your resilience. And I really appreciate that. And I hope you have a fantastic day.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. So that concludes today's Geekdom workshop. In the future, you can head to geekdom.com/events on our website for upcoming workshops, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for tuning in.